Hello, everyone. You're all very welcome to this Learn Signal exclusive Results Week webinar, where we're going to be discussing the essential guide to passing your next exam. My name's Connor Mateer. I'm part of the education team at Learn Signal, and I'm going to be leading today's session. Just before we get into the webinar, I'm just going to give about 30 seconds to let a few more people join. I can see we have lots of live attendees all starting to join now. But while we wait, we always like to make these webinars really interactive and get to know our community. So if people want to let us know in the chat box, maybe what country they're tuning in for, if they just got results, maybe what exam they just got results for, what subject they're planning on preparing for in September, anything like that. If we can get the chat going, it's always great, not just for us to see the different students on, but also for you to connect with other students. And you might find someone that's just completed an exam that you're preparing for, so you might be able to share some useful advice with them in there. So I can already see we've students posting in from a number of different countries, Lesotho, India, where else do we have? Tunisia, Pakistan, Cameroon, Uganda. So lots of different students all over the world, which is really great to see. I can see someone commenting from Dublin, which is where I'm doing this webinar from in Ireland, and starting to see some students, the different subjects that they're preparing for. Okay, so feel free to use the chat box throughout the session. You can talk to other students there. We also have members from the Learn Signal team that'll be posting in there. And you'll also see that there's a question and answer function, and I'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the session once we get through the course material. Okay, so we've had a bunch of people join on now live. We'll probably have a few more trickling in, but I think we can get started on the actual webinar. So for those of you who've just come in, my name's Connor Mateer. I'm part of the education team here at Learn Signal. And our education team have helped over 30,000 students pass their ACCA exams. So we have a huge amount of experience helping students get that pass mark in the exam. I know that this week in particular, we're doing a Results Week webinar. I know that Results Week can be quite a stressful or nervous week for a lot of students. I'm sure some of you are very happy with the results that you received yesterday. And I'm sure equally there's a number of students on today that are disappointed where the exam didn't go the way that they hoped and they didn't get that pass mark that they were looking for. The main thing with your ACCA and with Results Week in particular is really to start looking forward, to start really looking at that next exam, that September sitting, and the steps that you can take now to make sure that you do get that pass mark in that upcoming exam. And that's really the core of today's session. It's the essential guide to passing your next exam. We have based this webinar not just on the experience of our tutor team, which we have at Learn Signal, but also from our continuous discussion that we have with the ACCA examining team to understand what's causing students to pass and what's causing other students to fail. If you think that every quarter, there's about 100,000 students that sit an ACCA paper. So there's a huge amount of data into what's causing students to pass versus fail, and what steps you can take to make sure you're following the approach to the exam that leads to the highest likelihood of passing. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So to jump into the agenda of today's session, we're going to start off looking at the key questions that most students have around Results Week, whether they passed, failed. We're going to look at what those questions are and how you can decide what should be the steps from there. I'm then going to be discussing what are the main areas that students struggle with preparing for the exam. And it's really in understanding those main areas that we can start to make a plan for how you overcome those challenges and build that into your study. That'll be the next area we look at, which are really the simple and effective tips now for getting back into the study and staying motivated, not just up to the September exam, but for all your remaining exams. And then we're going to move into what we call at Learn Signal the golden rule to passing, which is really an approach to preparing for your exams that if you follow in your study leads to the highest likelihood of you passing that exam. So I'm going to be going over what that golden rule is and how you can start building it into your study from today. As mentioned, we also will have time for questions and answers at the end of the session, and we have an exclusive offer for all attendees that are on today. So I'm going to be doing a Q&A. If you have questions, you can use the question and answer button. So if you post your questions there, I'll come to them in that Q&A. I know some students are posting in the chat, but because the chat moves pretty quickly, I'll likely miss things in there during the session. So if you have a question you'd like me to address at the end, use the question button in the toolbar. And as I said, we have an amazing offer for attendees for all of you who are on today on our annual plan that I'm going to be discussing at the end of the session. Okay, so let's first start with the results week questions, because I know that's the time of the sitting that we're at, and it's probably the main thing on most people's minds. So there's really 3 scenarios that most students are going to find themselves in, or that any student's going to find themselves in. And the first one is that you've just failed your June exam. And likely questions that you have is, where did you go wrong? Should you resit that paper? Or maybe you've been studying a new paper and you're trying to decide what to do. Do you keep studying that? Do you do both? So that's the first category. The second category is for those students who pass their exam, and you might be now wondering, should you take 2 exams in the next sitting? Should you take 3 exams, which we don't advise, or what subject you should do next? So trying to decide, now that you've passed that exam, where should your focus lie going into this new sitting? And then the final situation is that you didn't pass or fail because you didn't sit an exam in June. And maybe you're only getting started now, you're wondering what you should do, you're trying to decide what subject to do, or maybe you've been preparing over the last few weeks, you're coming up to a few weeks into the sitting, but you feel like you're not making progress, and you're looking for advice on that. So what's really interesting, I know these feel like 3 very distinct categories of questions, but the advice that we give, regardless of the category that you fall into, is actually the same. And it's really that the first starting point for any new sitting needs to be, what subject am I making sure that I give enough attention to in this sitting to ensure that I pass it? So before you start thinking about resits, 2 papers, what subject, anything like that, you need to decide what one subject you're making sure you pass. And in order to make sure you pass, or rather to give yourself the best chance of passing, there's a number of things that you need to do. You need to get through the full syllabus for that paper. You need to do a range of past paper practice questions. You need to do mock exams. You need to look over examiner reports, look at technical articles. So there's a huge amount of things that you need to do, which we have built into our study plans, as I'll talk about later. And you need to decide the one subject that you're going to do all those necessary things for. And that's the first step. The next thing, sometimes students will then look at, okay, well, will I do a second subject, or will I do a resit alongside that? And if you find, as part of that decision, if you're thinking of doing a second subject, that you're starting to stop doing things that you know are necessary to pass the first subject, that's an indication that you're trying to do too much. Remember, everyone might be in different situations. Some people might be studying full-time, some people might be working and studying. So most people will have different time commitments. So you really need to analyze this with what works for you. But if you find that you're deciding to do 2 subjects for the next sitting, and suddenly you start saying, well, I won't be able to get through the full syllabus for each, so I'll cut corners, or I won't practice questions until closer to the exam, or I'm not going to do a mock exam for that subject because I don't have time. All of those are indications that you're starting to risk passing one subject by trying to do 2 subjects. The worst thing that you can do in the ACCA, or the most disheartening thing, is that you get through a sitting and you don't pass any exam and you feel like you haven't made progress. And of course that happens. I know that's probably happened for lots of people this week. But what you don't want the reason for that to be is that you tried to do too much. And a subject that you could have passed, you didn't, because you were doing 2 or 3 subjects. You were spreading yourself too thin across all of them, and it meant that you passed none of them, and you didn't build any of that momentum or progress. So my question to you is, focus. What's the subject you're putting as your number 1 priority for September? Then assess, can you do all the things necessary to pass that? And only after that should you consider doing another paper alongside that, provided that by doing that, it doesn't take away from all of the aspects that are necessary for that first subject. Sometimes, for some people who do have a resit, it's absolutely fine to just focus on that resit. Or sometimes you might find that you just want to focus on a new subject and you can come back to that resit later. Or you might find that you're actually very prepared for that resit. You understand the syllabus well, and you just need to focus on exam technique. And maybe that won't be as busy or as time consuming for the upcoming sitting. So you can do the resit alongside another subject. But just make sure, as I said, you're assessing everything you need to do for that subject, which we're going to be talking about throughout this session, before you decide to start doing multiple subjects together. Okay, so with that, let's now discuss the main issues that most students face when they're approaching these subjects. So there's 4 broad categories that we've split these into. And as I said, these come from the experience of our tutor team, from our continuous engagement with our student community, and from discussions with the ACCA. And even though there feels like there's a million reasons that you can fail an exam, we actually find that there's 4 broad categories that nearly all students fall into. So the first big challenge that students have is getting through the syllabus. And this is really around building your technical understanding. These are professional exams. Everything in the syllabus is examinable. So you can't cut corners. You can't gamble and not cover sessions or not cover syllabus areas. You have to get through that full syllabus. And even though as you get through the later papers, there's not those straight knowledge questions, unless you've got through the full syllabus and you have that foundational understanding, you're really going to struggle to apply that to questions. So the first challenge that students have is getting through all the course material and building that technical understanding. The second one is around maintaining motivation. And particularly in weeks like this, where maybe you've got a result you weren't looking for in the results week, maintaining motivation is really tough. You know, there's a number of weeks. You've got about a month and a half up until the September sitting. There's a lot of material to be covered. It's hard to maintain your motivation over that time. And that's just focusing at one subject and one sitting maybe. Then you build in the motivation of having to do that over a number of subjects, and it can be really tough. And motivation is a real issue for students, but it's something that's not talked about a lot with other providers. And we have a lot of supports in place that I'll come to later for supporting that motivation. But that's the second challenge, maintaining motivation to get through all the work required in the lead up to the exam. The third challenge is probably the biggest reason that most students fail from discussion with the ACCA, and it's all around application of knowledge to questions. So as I said, you need to have that foundation technical understanding in order to be able to be prepared for the exam. But most of the exam is actually assessing your ability to apply that knowledge to different scenarios and different questions. And a lot of the feedback you see from the examiner is that students are so focused on learning off the syllabus that they actually really struggle with that application piece. And they're not able to demonstrate their knowledge to the examiner in the different scenarios that are presented in questions. So application is such an essential part of preparing for the exams, but it's something that a lot of students are struggling with, and that you see in reports from the examiner is causing a huge amount of students to fail. And then the final point, sometimes students, they get through the full syllabus, they work on their application, they feel motivated right till the end, and then it just doesn't happen for them on the day. So that final challenge is about managing your exam performance on the day. Oftentimes we feel like we can do everything right in the sitting, and then things just don't go right for us. We maybe mismanage our time. We're not a bit stressed using the computer-based exam tool. Maybe the order we approach questions doesn't feel right. Stuff just goes wrong in the day of the exam, which causes us to fail. But the main thing about point number 4 is that exam performance isn't something that you just hope happens on the day. It's something that you have to be preparing for and practicing throughout the sitting. And we're going to be talking about that in our tips, how you replicate that exam experience so that you feel comfortable on the exam day, that you're calm, that you're used to practicing all those important elements. So there's 4 issues up there. I'd be really interested if people could comment in the chat box, maybe what issue they identify with the most. So what do you think is your biggest challenge? But the likelihood for most students is there's probably more than one that they find difficult. So maybe you'll let us know what the main issue is, if it's 1, 2, 3, or all of the issues that you find difficult. But it would be really interesting if a few students want to comment. You can even just put the number in there of what you find hard, just so we can get a bit of an idea of what are the main areas that students struggle with. So if you want to comment on that in the chat box, really interesting to see that the first two that have come in are around motivation, which makes sense because without motivation, it's very hard to get through the syllabus, to practice application, and to manage exam performance. So motivation kind of sits over everything, which is if you don't have that, it's going to be a very hard sitting. So thanks to all the people who are commenting. You can continue to comment, and I'm going to now move to our simple and effective tips. So the tips that we're going to share here are backed by a lot of data we have with our students, and also a lot of advice shared by the ACCA. But what will probably come to all of you is that when you see them, they seem really simple. They seem simple and obvious. But what's really interesting is most students still aren't following this advice, even though it's so clearly proven to lead to the best results. So before you dismiss any of these things, I want you to really think, are you following the advice, or how could you improve upon it within your study? So again, as I said, the first one that seems really obvious, but let's dive deeper into it, is about planning your study. Oftentimes, students think they have a plan for the study, but most of the time they sit down to study, they're just looking at what's the next thing I'm going to focus on today. And what that means if you're only sitting down and deciding what to do each day is you can find yourself getting close to the exam, but you're way behind in terms of the amount of stuff that you should have had done. So when we say plan your study, you need to have a detailed plan of all the things you need to do between now and the exam. And you need to have it broken down how you're going to do them, maybe on a weekly basis. And then you can break it down even further in that week of how you're going to get through that in the different study sessions you do. Because often what a lot of students do is they have a plan to get through the syllabus, and that takes them longer than they thought. And then it means they're only getting right up close to the exam, and they haven't done all these other important areas around practicing questions, doing mock exams, reading other reports. So you need to have a clear plan in place. And that will actually help with motivation, because when you set that plan, it becomes very clear what you need to do each week to stay on top of that. When you're on top of all that, you'll feel more confident going to the exam. The great thing about LearnSignal is we actually prepare those study plans for you, and they're dynamic. So you can adjust them according to the amount of time you have and the progress you've made so far to make sure that you stay on top. So we've interactive study plans that are work back from the date of your exam, and show you your progress and your completion, so you know exactly what you need to be doing to stay on top. The second point, again, seems obvious, but we'll dive deeper, is around studying regularly. So it's been proven that shorter, more intense study sessions are more effective than these long, multiple-hour study sessions, which a lot of students go for. And the reason for that should be obvious. It's very hard to concentrate if you sit down and try to study for 5 or 6 hours one day of the week, because what happens is you lose your energy pretty early on, and then you start to cut corners. So you start to say, I'm not going to practice a question, I'll just read over my notes, or I'll just read through the solution rather than actually do out the question. So studying regularly allows you to have more effective, intense study sessions, but it also gives you more time to actually absorb and understand the material that you're going through. So where we'd encourage that is planning your study starting earlier in the cycle. So obviously for anyone today is making sure you're studying from now up until the exams, and breaking down those study sessions into shorter chunks. So, between even 30 to 60 or 90 minutes in multiple days is really effective. Take lots of breaks, so that when you are studying, you're getting the most effective study as possible that you can. And how that might look is, when you're studying for 1 hour, what you could do is go over some material for 20 minutes. So a course video for 20 minutes, practice a question for 20 minutes to test your understanding, and review the solution and go through any relevant notes over those final 20 minutes. That's a really effective short study session that will get you the most value of being able to really understand the content, test yourself against it, and confirm that understanding, rather than trying to sit down for 4 or 5 hours and watch videos in all that time, because you'll start to lose concentration, and it's just not as effective. So having a plan, regular study, and then the third point is practicing questions. Again, most people will say, that's obvious, I know I need to practice questions. The problem is that most students don't start practicing questions till far too close to the exam. And the reason for this is understandable. Students often think, well, I don't want to practice questions until I've gotten through the syllabus or until I understand the subject. But the way to build the understanding is through practice. So where we encourage students is to look at all the practice you do up until maybe 3 weeks before the exam as a learning exercise. Don't beat yourself up over the result that you're getting, or if you go to the solution and you answered it wrong, or if you're scoring poorly on the marking scheme. All that's fine. Just view it as a learning exercise. So even from this stage of the study cycle, when you go through new areas of the syllabus, you should be practicing questions after that. The reason for this is it builds those application skills. By practicing questions, you start to build a link between what you're seeing in the syllabus and how the examiner is examining that in the paper. So it's really important that not only are you practicing doing your answers, you're starting to see how the examiner asks questions, and you build that link up in your head. And even by trying to answer questions, it's making you pull your knowledge of the syllabus out and tailor it to the different scenarios. And even if you struggle with that early on, by going through solutions and going through marking schemes, it builds such a strong understanding of how to apply your knowledge. And if you can do all that now, it means in those final few weeks before the exam, when you're really focused on practicing questions, you can focus much more on exam technique. So practice questions, and by that we mean practice questions early, from this right at the start of the study cycle. The next key point, we got one extra there, is completing a mock exam. And I would broadly categorize this as trying to replicate the exam experience. But the best way to do that is by doing a mock exam. So we have a saying, don't let the first time you attempt the exam be the day of the actual exam. You really want to try recreate that exam experience as much as possible in your study. So by sitting down to do a mock exam, if you do it under exam conditions, you're learning so much about what that exam experience is going to be like. Not only are you getting to practice a full paper of questions and see a range of different syllabus areas, but you're getting to practice managing your time over a long exam. You're getting to practice trying a range of different types of questions, so constructed response, objective test. You start to see what it's like to tire out as you go further into a paper. You have to go through that planning phase of deciding which order you're going to answer the questions and having to move on from questions when you complete the time you have available. So it's such a good experience of replicating that exam, and all of that will help with your exam performance on the day. So we encourage students to aim to do at least 2 mock exams, ideally 3 if you can, but make sure you're doing mock exams, because having gone through that experience, it'll just prepare you so much better for the actual exam. The next point is about listening to the examiner. So the examiner releases a huge amount of really valuable information to students twice a year, and all of their previous advice is shared and available on the ACCA website, and they do that through their examiner reports. So the examiner reports are where, after sittings, the examiner will talk about students' performance. They'll go through a selection of questions and explain what passing students did right and what caused other students to fail. So it's such a valuable resource because it helps you get in the mind of the person who's going to be marking your paper. And if you can understand what they're looking for, it's so valuable for how you approach different questions, because the more of an understanding you build, that will mean that as you start new questions, you'll start to think, how are the marks going to be allocated for this? What way should I structure my answer to support that marking scheme? What level of detail do I need to go into to make sure I'm satisfying the examiner? So there's so much good advice and rich information in those examiner reports that you need to make sure that they're a tool you're using. And we've incorporated that examiner advice throughout the Learn Signal course content, but also throughout the solutions that we write, the webinars that we run on how to answer questions. All of that incorporates that advice. And we also have links throughout our site to those examiner reports. So they're such an important tool because they help you get in the mind of the person who's ultimately going to be marking your paper. And the more you understand what they're looking for, the better you're going to score in that final exam. And then the final point is about using an approved learning provider. So there's a statistic from the ACCA that students who use a learning partner are 30% more likely to pass their exam. And the reason that is because all of the simple and effective tips we have on screen are made accessible in such an easy way to you through LearnSignal. So we give you the detailed plan that you can fit around your own life to prepare for whatever subject you're doing. It's broken down into short, manageable chunks to help you study regularly and effectively. We build in relevant practice questions from the start, so you're testing that understanding as you go. And we have mock exams where we get feedback from our tutor team, as well as building in all that examiner advice. We also help, as I'll talk about later, with making sure you can get through the full syllabus in a simple way while building those application skills and exam technique. So using an approved learning partner is such a help to students. And that's why we always make sure students who are preparing for that exam, one of the best things you can do is just get a partner like LearnSignal on side, and because it's proven to help with the results. So one of the things I mentioned early on was this idea of the golden rule to passing, which really encompasses a number of the tips that we talked about there into an approach to study. So if you can start thinking and approaching your study in this way, it will be really beneficial to you, not just in September, but for all exams that you go on to do. So what we highlighted is to perform well in the exam, there's kind of 3 core pillars that you need. The first is a technical understanding. And at LearnSignal, we cover this in short lecture videos and notes on every topic. And that's kind of the core foundation. So you need to have that technical understanding. The second pillar then is be able to apply that to scenarios. As we said, application skills are so important. And the way that we build those is through recent past paper questions. We've tutor masterclass videos which show you how to answer questions to help you bridge that gap. So that's the second core pillar, and it's built off the technical understanding, is how you apply that to different scenarios. And then the final pillar is really around your exam technique, and that's that exam performance on the day we talked about. It's being able to manage your time, use the CBE tool, use spreadsheets, work on your layout, the order you answer questions. All of these things are this idea of exam standard practice. And what's so important is that you're building that practice every time you're studying. So how these 3 pillars look together and this golden rule to passing is when you approach study, try do so in a way that ticks off each of these elements. So how that might look is, as I said, you go over a video to build the technical understanding. You practice a paper or a question related to that area to practice the application. And when you're practicing that question, you do so in a way that replicates the exam experience. So you do it under time pressure. You use the computer-based exam tool, and you don't look at notes and solutions. And what all that means together is that even now, when you're sitting down to study, you're replicating the exam experience while building your application and technical understanding. And if you can approach your study every time you sit down in a way that tries to build these 3 elements, that will be so valuable to you when you get to the actual exam. A useful graphic that we have is that, and it might be relevant to some students this week as you've got your exam results, but if you don't have any technical understanding, you're probably going to score less than 20%. You know, if you don't understand the course, you're not going to perform well. Even if you've a really good technical understanding, it's unlikely that you'll get above 40% because the exams are all about how you apply that scenarios. With good application skills, you might find yourself getting in the 40% because you're able to apply the knowledge to the different scenarios that you're seeing. But if you're not able to manage your exam performance on the day, you're not going to be able to get into those pass marks. So you need the technical understanding, you need the application, but you also need to be able to go and perform on the day and answer all the questions, manage your time, present and lay it out in a way that's easy for the examiner to see everything that you know. All of that is so important. It's the students that have that are not only passing, but that are placing really well in the exams. And we've seen a number of students who've won awards in their countries with LearnSignal that have followed this approach and that have gotten the top marks in their country for their papers. So it's a really valuable approach to study, and it's something that gets easier over time and that you can bring into each new exam. Because even, let's say you're preparing for audit at the moment, if you have that good exam technique, those time management skills, those spreadsheet skills, all of that, you can carry that into other subjects that you're doing. So I'm just going to talk to close about the few things that LearnSignal offer, and then I'm going to give a little bit about a special thing we're running for SBL and SBR students coming up that might be relevant to a few people before we move to our Q&A section. So we're a gold approved learning partner with the ACCA, and that means that we offer everything you need to pass your exams. It's been tested, validated by the ACCA, and our student results have led us to getting a gold approved partner status. So we give you everything you need to get through the syllabus. So we've lectures covering 100% of the syllabus. Our lecture videos are all designed to be in short, bite-sized chunks of about 10 to 15 minutes so that you can get through them quickly and follow that regular study approach. And we've summary notes on every topic that are downloadable. So you don't need any other books or materials. Everything you need is included within your LearnSignal subscription. To build those application skills, we've exam standard practice questions on all areas of the syllabus. And we also have tutor walkthroughs and solutions. So as you're building those application skills, you can watch our tutor team go through questions and learn how you should be approaching them. And then to build those exam technique skills, we run revision boot camps for every subject for the 3 weeks before the exam, where each day we give you a different task to prepare for the exam. We also have mock exams to help you build those exam technique skills. So we really focus, particularly in those final few weeks before the exams, on everything needed to build that exam technique. But one of the main issues that a lot of students identified at the start that was really challenging was about motivation. Very often the ACCA can feel like an isolated journey. You feel like you're on your own. You know, friends and family sometimes don't really understand, or work don't understand. So we've done everything we can at LearnSignal to make that feel less isolated and to build supports that help with motivation for our entire student community. So we have 24/7 tutor supports available on the website. So if you're a LearnSignal member and you're stuck on a question or you don't understand a topic, you can reach out at any point to our tutor chat support and they respond to you within 2 minutes. We also run regular webinars like this for our members where we walk through particular subjects and questions, and you can talk with other students preparing for the same subject as you. Alongside that, we've podcasts, blogs, social media, all these different things to help you feel less alone, answer your questions, and keep you motivated and on track with your study. So everything's included in a LearnSignal subscription to all of the things I outlined there. And one subscription with LearnSignal gives you access to all subjects. So whether you're doing 2 subjects, you have a resit, anything like that, with one subscription, you've access to everything, all the materials across all our subjects. We also like to show this. We've students working or who have gone to work in these range of companies. And that's the thing to remember now, particularly if you're disappointed with your results. Think of what is that dream job you're looking for, because all the work you're putting in now and the investment you're making in learning partners now is all unlocking that ultimate job that you're hoping to get to, whether it's in a Big 4 accounting firm, in a consulting or investment firm, or you're looking to move into tech or more commercial goods. The work you're doing now is all building you on that path to getting there. So make sure that you're taking the right steps to ensure you pass those exams. You'll see we're one of the best rated ACCA tuition providers. I know the testimonials are quite small there, but you can go on our Trustpilot and see the feedback that students have shared and the 5-star reviews we get from students of how we help them get to ACCA affiliate status and pass all their exams. So it's not just me saying it, it's not just our team. You can hear other students reporting of how helpful that's been to them. So I'm just very quickly going to talk about a special offer that we're now running for the December sitting for SBL and SBR. So anyone who might be doing those subjects in December, we've got a very special offer where we're going to be running live classes in the build up to those exams alongside weekend revision courses. We're also giving students as part of that a full mock exam that will be corrected by our team. And this is entirely on demand, so students will be able to access in their own time, even if they miss the live classes. And we're offering a pass guarantee on that. So these programs we're running for SBL and SBR, if you register for these, we're giving a pass guarantee that you'll pass your exams. And for anyone who doesn't pass their exams, they will keep full access to all the materials going forward. So it's included as part of your subscription, and you'll maintain access to that if you've registered for this particular offer. You'll see a few more details there on screen. I appreciate that not everyone is preparing for those subjects. So for those who are preparing for SBL and SBR, make sure that you just take advantage of that amazing offer that we're going to be running. It's starting in the 23rd of September, so just after the September exam sessions. And as you can see, it includes live tuition and revision sessions and tutor-led practice support. So we are creating particular supports to help you get through those mandatory strategic professional exams. So anyone planning for December, now is a great time to sign up to LearnSignal so that you can take advantage of that in the next sitting. Okay, so I'm going to move to the Q&A, but I did announce at the start that we had a very special offer for everyone who's coming on today. So for today, we're offering 50% off your ACCA annual tuition. So if you scan the QR code on screen, or I'm sure we've members of the team who'll share a link in the chat box, and take note of the coupon code ACCA Results 50, you can get 50% off your annual tuition. So everything I've talked about today, you can have covered for the next year for all subjects by taking advantage of our annual subscription. So you'd have instant access to all your ACCA courses for a year. You'd have lectures covering 100% of the syllabus of every subject. And as I mentioned, all the tutor solution videos for every type of question on the paper, our revision bootcamp courses for the next 4 sittings that you can do, all the other supports we talked about, downloadable notes, practice questions, live support webinars, unlimited tutor support. As I mentioned, we've lots of LearnSignal community member supports. We've WhatsApp groups for certain subjects. So everything you need to have your ACCA covered over the next year can be purchased with an ACCA annual subscription. Our subscription price, even before the discount, is probably the lowest that you'll find out there. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee a day, you can have access to all of the support for the next year. So I'm sure for a lot of students that would take them through to getting to affiliate status. So do make sure you're taking advantage of this offer that we have available today as a Results Week special offer. So make sure that you're following the link that's gone in the chat box. There's also an email there. You'll find more information on the prices alongside the links and the QR code. But I can guarantee you're not going to find a better offer on your ACCA tuition out there. So you can have this offer to cover your ACCA for the next year. And as we talked about at the start, students who use a partner like LearnSignal are 30% more likely to pass. So by signing up and following this, you're instantly increasing your chances of getting that pass in the exam. And you can do that for the next 4 sittings. So I hope a lot of you take advantage of that offer. I hope that myself and the rest of the LearnSignal tutor team get to talk to you more as a LearnSignal member in all the supports we have for our members. So just make sure you're clicking that link, take note of the coupon code, or scan the QR code, and you'll find more information there. Okay, so as I said at the start, I'm going to move into the Q&A session now. I'm going to, I'll try, if anyone has questions, make sure you get them in, and you can upvote questions. So if you see a question that you'd particularly like answered, you can give that a vote up, and I'll work through these, and I'm going to leave this on screen just so people can take advantage of it. So the first comment, which has got a few votes, was from a student saying, my result wasn't really unexpected. So if the results, whether the result was or wasn't unexpected, I think the main thing to note here is everything we've talked about today are really the required elements that you need to pass your exam. And sometimes students will know that they haven't done all of that, in which case, maybe the result isn't expected. Or sometimes students don't realize the level that they need to be at to pass the exams. So they don't realize the extent they need to prepare in advance, which is where it can be unexpected. And what I mean by this is sometimes students think, okay, if I get through the full syllabus, I'll be able to pass on the day. But as we talked about earlier, so much of the exam comes from application skills and exam technique that you need to be practicing and building all those into your preparation. So if you got your results and you were surprised, ask yourself, did I do all the stuff that was talked about in the webinar today? Did I practice questions from really early? Did I do mock exams? Did I read examiner reports? Did I get through the full syllabus? You really need to be, at this stage, reflecting back on the sitting you've just had to understand how maybe you could have prepared better for that. So hopefully that helps with that first comment that got a few votes. So I'm sure that there's a number of students who feel the same. Okay, I'm just going to see some other questions. So, okay, I plan to sit SBL in September after passing SBR. What are your advice to pass this theoretical? Oh, sorry, where's that question gone? Sorry, yeah. The questions are jumping around a little bit with the votes. So I'm just answering this now. I planned it SBL in September after passing SBR. What are your advice to pass this theoretical subject for someone that is good at crunching numbers? So I think the main thing here is, these subjects are less theoretical. It's more that they're really your ability to kind of discuss and approach case studies. So oftentimes people are quite good at calculations or the number crunching, as you said. The main thing is that you understand why you're crunching those numbers and what is the output of whatever numbers you're crunching. So if you're asked to do calculations, you really need to understand why those calculations help you get to a conclusion that you're looking for. And that's really what SBL is. You're given case study scenarios, you're given lots of information, and there's numbers that can support your analysis of that. So it's always important to remember, particularly at the strategic professional level, they're not necessarily giving all the marks just for your ability to use those numbers. It's how you discuss and draw conclusions from what you're doing with them. So what I would say to you is really ask yourself anytime you're doing those calculations, what information is this giving me to support my analysis or to help me get to a conclusion? And the way to do that is practice. So particularly with SVL, it's quite a different subject than you might be used to before. So try to practice as many papers as you can as possible. So, and it only comes from actually writing out those answers and trying to discuss the numbers and use them for that analysis that you start to build those skills. And like oftentimes students will just focus on doing the calculation and then they'll say, I know how I would talk about that, or I've done the hard part. Like, I'm not going to bother writing out my conclusion because I know what I'd say. But what happens is when you get to the day of the exam, then that's the bit you struggle with, and that's the bit that takes time, or that's the bit you're not as good at. So get in the habit of always practicing the discussion where it's required alongside the calculation, and it'll help you prepare for subjects like that. But the key is practice. Then alongside your practice, you can be reading the examiner reports to see what the examiner's looking for. And alongside that, if you need, you can look at the Learn Signal Masterclass videos where tutors walk through how you should approach it so that you build that understanding. So hopefully that helps. Another good question here. How do we approach marginal failure, which is this, let's say, 45% to 49%, which is such a tough position to be in and can be really disheartening because you're so close. I think the key thing with this is, you've displayed a strong technical understanding and a level of application to get here. Really, what's maybe getting you into that pass mark is your exam technique probably has an element of it. So make sure that all of that side is good, that you're completing the paper, that you're using the tools appropriately, all of that side. Because, if you're not able to answer 20% of the paper because of time pressure, it makes it very difficult to pass. I think the other thing that really helps understanding those marginal failures is going back over the examiner reports, because sometimes we feel like we did everything right, but when we look at that examiner commentary, we start to learn that there's maybe small adjustments we can make that have big impacts on our results. Very often, the one that you see the most in that is that students aren't going into sufficient detail on the particular thing that's being asked. So I'm not sure what subject you're preparing for, but sometimes it's just that students are still writing too general or generic an answer, or still just pulling content from the syllabus rather than going into sufficient detail specifically tailored to that scenario. So if you find yourself in that kind of marginal failure category, I try read some recent examiner reports, even though they might not be the exam that you've done, because you'll start to see the level that the examiner is expecting for students to get into that pass mark. And this is similar to a student who's asking that they were shocked with the results because they answered all the questions. So again, what's happening here is even if you're answering all the questions, if you're falling below the pass mark in each question, it's because you're not meeting the requirements that the examiner is expecting. And the only way to overcome that is by understanding how marks are allocated, which you'll learn from the marking schemes alongside the examiner report commentary. And once you start to understand that, you might understand that even though you're answering the question, you're not answering it in a way that's getting all those marks. So the better an understanding you get around those areas, the better you're going to start performing. So I'd really encourage you, as we said at the start, understanding the examiner is so essential because it helps you understand what you need to do to pass. So for anyone who does feel in that disheartened way where they didn't score as well as they thought they might, it's really important you start to look at some of those examiner reports because it'll start to give some color to why you're maybe not performing as well as you thought. Okay, so we're just coming up to the time limit. We've just gone over the 45-minute mark. I'm going to find one more question that's applicable to most students. I see one student asked about the Oxford Brookes. If you reach out to the Learn Signal chat support, they'll be able to direct you. I'm actually an Oxford Brookes mentor, so they'll be able to pass you on to me if you're interested in preparing for the next Oxford Brookes sitting. But I'm just going to find one more question that's applicable to as many students as possible. As you can see, that the offer is still on screen. So just to remind you before we finish up of that amazing offer. Okay, I'm going to answer this because I think it's an important one that comes up particularly often around exam results. So students often get very focused on pass marks at ACCA, and the pass marks always fall within a particular range. You know, sometimes the strategic professional exams are kind of between 35 and 40% often. The applied skills are slightly higher. The main thing is don't get hung up on pass rates. They have and always will be around the same level. Just focus on yourself. If you follow the examiner reports of recent years, you'll see that the examiner, the thing that's causing students to fail remain consistent sitting on sitting year on year. And as long as students aren't doing those elements, they're not going to pass the exam. So as long as you're following what the examiner is looking for and what they're requesting from you in those examiner reports, you're going to be in a much better position to pass. So it's not that the exams have to be done on, you know, a bell curve that a certain number of people have to fail, and that you're failing because they want you to fail, or they want people to fall in those exam results or those pass mark rates. It's that people aren't doing enough to get to the pass mark. So just focus on yourself, focus what you need to do in the exam, focus what the examiner is looking for. And if you follow all the advice that we shared in this, in particular that golden rule to passing, you know, you'll find yourself on the right side of those pass marks. So don't get overly hung up on the pass rates. I know it's hard not to look at them, but the pass rates are relatively low, but the ACCA would like them to be higher. But they're not going to pull them up, or they're not going to pass more students unless students are doing enough to pass the exam. So that's where you just have to focus on yourself and preparing as much as possible. Okay, so we've gone a little bit over the original planned time, but I hope you found today's session useful. I hope you're feeling okay coming out of exam results week. I know it can be a tough week, but as we said at the start, the main thing is you start thinking forward. You know, focus on September. The best way to make yourself feel better is to get that pass mark in September if you were disappointed in the June sitting. So put the study plan in place, start that regular study. As we said, build lots of practice questions and replicating the exam experience in. And if you can do that, particularly with a learning partner like Learn Signal guiding you along the way, I think you're going to be in a really good position for September. So I really do hope as many of you as possible take advantage of this amazing offer that we have today for everyone who was attending this webinar. Again, take note of the QR code, or sorry, scan the QR code, take note of the coupon code. There's links that are up in the chat box, or you can go directly to the website. And if you want to talk to any of our tutor team, you can see there's links to book a call. You can talk to the chat support on the website, and they'll help you if you have questions about that Learn Signal subscription. So wishing you the best of luck for the sitting ahead. I hope I get to chat to lots more of you as Learn Signal students in some of our member supports and webinars. But yeah, I hope this week's going okay for you. best of luck with the study going forward, and thank you to everyone for coming on and making it such an interactive session. All the best of luck, and thanks.